this past week, and there's no more news until training camp. Me and Suneil will break it all down, expectations, reality, and give you all the upcoming news after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of 49er Talk. I am Rohan Chakravarthi. With me, I've got Suneil. How are you doing, Suneil?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Love talking football on a Sunday.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Just like, if you think it's the week's end, you end the day or end the week with football. And if you think it's the week's beginning, you start the week with football. Ain't nothing better about it. But, like I said, the 49ers, they ended their mini camp this past week. They cut it a day short like they normally do, only 2 days worth of mini camp. And so really real quick before we start, what were just your takeaways in a way? And what did you think of the 2 day period for mini camp?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any major breaking news that you could take from it. I think it was ideal in the sense that Deebo was on campus, Bosa was on campus. It was nice seeing, all the new coaches being integrated in, and finally hearing from the players and just seeing the team as a whole. There seems like there's going to be some nice battles to pay attention to during training camp, and obviously, with Jimmy not being there, it really gave all eyes on Trey Lance an opportunity to take all the first team reps, which I think is good. But I don't think there's anything really that could be taken away, bigger picture, until training camp gets in. Everybody's wearing pads, they're tackling, and we get to kind of see everybody at full speed. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, like you said, there's not too much where you can take away, right? It's not like some breakthrough came through. It's still no pads. But the great part is you get to see a lot of familiar faces back in the building. All the veterans have now showed up. We didn't have any holdouts. And so, one sec. And so with no holdouts now, you go into camp and now you have everybody pretty much content. Obviously, you have to deal with contract situations with Deebo Samuel, with Nick Bosa, but everybody is there. Everybody is present, which can't be said for certain other organizations, right? Like our rival Seattle Seahawks, who had DK Metcalf. He was out this past week after showing up for voluntary camp. Just speaking real quick about the Deebo and DK situation, what did it tell you that Deebo showed up while DK did not show up after DK showed up for voluntary minicamp earlier this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, they both are rep by the same agent, so that's one. But I think even though Deebo and DK are drafted in the same round, or are in the same situation as far as contracts, negotiations, and wanting one because this is their last year of their contract, they're in very different situations as far as the teams that they're on. So I think one of the key telltale signs was Trent Williams' interview when he was talking about Deebo. Trent and Deebo obviously are very close, but he mentioned something along the lines of Deebo showing up shows a little bit about his maturity and how he's handling the situation moving forward. And I think that's more of the case. Like, Deebo understands, yeah, you got to get paid, but he also understands he's part of this culture. It's a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. It's not the same for DK. Even though Gino's out there saying that they have a Super Bowl caliber roster, he's the only person that believes that. I don't even think Pete Carroll believes he has a Super Bowl with caliber roster, which is why he got rid of, Russ in the trade. So I think Deebo may, and this is me just completely reading into it, may have come to the realization he maybe handled this contract negotiation a little bit wrong, as far as taking it to social media and allowing narratives maybe to be carried on the way that they were. And coming back, I think, is kind of like that olive branch to the team that they can now come to some kind of understanding. Hey, Deebo knows, hey, I want to be here, but I need it to be, on my terms. And the team is, hey, we want you to be here. Let's come to a number that makes sense for both of us. So I think it's just a good sign. As far as with DK and Seattle, that team is in a completely different situation. So maybe it shows DK might not be as sold on the organization, and probably is coming to the understanding that, look, I got to look out for me because this team just got rid of a Hall of Fame quarterback. So maybe they're not really in the mindset of winning now. So he needs to be in the mindset of getting his money now.
Yeah, I mean that's very fair, right? I think it's telling when someone shows up after off-season foot surgery with DK Metcalf. Someone shows up for the first part and then doesn't show up now. That means that something went wrong in that period of time, contract talks or whatever it may be. They derailed to the point where DK Metcalf didn't show up because he was the guy early in the offseason that everyone was talking about was putting the contract talk aside and being there with his team despite all the despite the lack of talent maybe on the team, despite foot surgery, which obviously could be the excuse for him not to be there for a majority of the offseason. And yet he was there, but now he's not there. That's somewhat telling. As for Deebo Samuel, I think 49er fans, and despite the reporting of Jeremy Fowler consistently from ESPN saying that the trade request still stands, it seems like they're getting back in the groove, and a deal with Deebo Samuel will be reached. It's not a matter of if now, it seems like it's a matter of when. And given how negotiating works, how it's a ton of back and forth, you'd expect it probably to happen around the similar timeline that the other deals have occurred, which is near that training camp period, probably before training camp, so that you have a reinvigorated Deebo Samuel, a healthy Deebo Samuel heading into training camp, looking to put his full force out on the line because he's got his contract situation figured out.
I have a question for you, Rohan, because you're better at understanding the cap than I am.
Yeah.
Is there a path forward that they can get Deebo his contract while still having Jimmy on the books? Or does his number need to come off of the books for them to be able to give him the guaranteed money that he needs this year?
Yeah, there is a way for Deebo Samuel to get his contract with Garoppolo on the books. So remember, what just freed up a ton of cap space just last week? The retirement of Alex Mack. That freed up around a little over $4 million, and not all of that was used to sign the draft class. I think it was only half of that maybe was used to sign your draft class. Add in one other move that's going to happen: the release of D Ford, which should happen soon. That's going to add about another million in salary cap, 1.2 million for the 2022 season. And so you have extra wiggle room. It really all is dependent on the signing bonus and how the 49ers structure the contract. I think they can get it so that the contract doesn't increase, the cap hit doesn't increase by a million. Like, I think they can get it to where the cap hit increases by less than $1 million, or even less than what its cap hit currently is. So to answer your question, yes, they can do it with Jimmy Garoppolo still on the roster. Now, can you trade Jimmy Garoppolo and still end up does it make it maybe easier? Maybe, because you don't necessarily have to maneuver as much. But then again, I don't think the 49ers are in a situation where they want to make Deebo Samuel's first year extremely expensive. Remember, this next year isn't going to be a part of his extension. This next year is actually his last year on his rookie deal. The extension will kick in the year after that. It's just financial stuff with the signing bonus and how that implicates this year's cap hit. But I don't expect it to increase significantly. And so because we already have some, obviously it's not a ton, but because we have some cap space from the Mac move and from the Ford move that should happen soon, yeah, I do think that we can make a deal with Deebo Samuel occur, even with Garoppolo on the roster.
I know you projected a bunch of stuff earlier when we were talking about, this was weeks ago when initially the Deebo stuff was coming up. Do you still feel like the numbers that you had come up with back then, I think it was something around 20 to 24 million per year with like 50 million guaranteed or something around there? Do you eye that still being the case, or now with the way that the market has shifted, seeing AJ Brown's money and, with the holdout, or not necessarily holdout, but it taking this long, do you think that the numbers are going to be maybe higher or around the same?
So I think back in January, before the offseason even started, I was breaking down the contract numbers, right, for Deebo Samuel. This was like in the near the end of the offseason when the Deebo Samuel contract talk was beginning, and I think my original numbers was 5 years, 120 million. So that was about 24 a year, and so that was about 24 million a year, and then the total or it was, you're right, actually. It was about 22 and a half to 24. I said 5 year, 112 to 120 million, and then 55 to 65 million guaranteed. And so that was a 5 year deal, right? And then if it was 4 year deal, it'd be 4 year, 92 to 100. Now, there are a couple of things that have obviously happened since then. We've had a record breaking number of wide receiver contracts happen, but the major one was Christian Kirk, which significantly elevated the market, right? Because an average receiver was getting paid $21 million a year. And I understand how it's only a short-term deal with the way that they structured it. It's essentially a 2 year deal. But after that, that's when the receiver contract started kicking in to full length to the point where we get Tyreek Hill making 30 AAV, right? Now, AAV doesn't necessarily matter. It's the guaranteed money and really the structure of the deal. That's what matters. So there are a couple of indicators. First, A.J. Brown's deal, I think, is a significant indicator because he's a guy in Deebo Samuel's range, right? Samuel probably gets a little more than him, given that his deal comes later. But AJ Brown got 25 million a year, but the main thing is guarantees he got 57 million, right? So I'd expect Deebo Samuel's to get a little over that hump, maybe in the 60 to 65 million range, like I previously indicated. However, I think the AAV might be a little higher than the 49ers expect, unless Deebo Samuel doesn't care about that as much and wants that guaranteed money to go higher. So essentially, I think it's going to be the first 3 years of the contract is going to be fully guaranteed or guaranteed for injury, something like that, whatever stipulation it might be, where it might be like 22, 24, 20 million, something like that, where it becomes like A.J. Brown's deal currently, right? It's 4 years, 100 million, but it's also including this, it's also with this year where he's making little to no money, right? 3 to 4 million. Deebo Samuel's contract will include that. So if it's like a 5 year deal with a 3 year out clause, it'll be essentially like a 4 year, maybe $80 million deal, right? 20 million a year, which isn't that bad at all.
Yeah. And it's a little bit tricky now because I agree with you. I think that 3 year number is very key because 3 years means that's the end of Trey's rookie contract, right? So obviously
right, exactly.
you would imagine if everything goes the way that people expect Trey to go, that's going to be a big contract. But also it gives you an opportunity to make a decision on Brandon Ayuk, right? Because that gives you 2 years into Brandon Ayuk. Hit that 5th year is guaranteed. That means there'd be 1 year where Deebo has money, and then that would be going into Brandon Ayuk's, where you need to extend him or decide what you want to do with him. It's going to be interesting because I think you as well, envision Brandon Ayuk really showing out this year and excelling with Trey Lance as his quarterback. You don't really see too many situations with teams being able to pay 2 really high-powered wide receivers. So if Brandon Ayuk turns into a wide receiver 1 caliber type receiver, and you already have Deebo there making big money, I wonder, 2-3 years from now, what that decision making is going to be for the 49ers. Do you stick with Ayuk and maybe trade Deebo, or do you trade Ayuk and stick with Deebo?
Right. And you talked about the timeline, right? Where Ayuk will have that 5th year option. So there isn't necessarily a rush. And Brandon Ayuk doesn't seem like the type like to hold out specifically for money, right? He's a guy who's been on the West Coast for the majority of his life. He seems like he's going to get in his groove in San Francisco. I expect him to get I expect him to get a lucrative extension if he continues to prove himself and gets the 1,000-yard hump once or twice over the next couple of seasons. But saying what I said, Deebo Samuel's contract could be a 4 year deal, including this year that he has right now, right? Trey Lance's contract stems over 4 years, including that 5th year option. Brandon Ayuk's contract is 3 more years. So you're right. There's that one gap year where you can figure out one of 2 things. Do you want to keep Brandon Ayuk because you think he's a valuable receiver number 2? Or is Deebo Samuel not performing to expectations, so you have an insurance policy and you sign Brandon Ayuk to an extension so that if Deebo Samuel doesn't bounce back in that last year, you let him go and opt out of that contract. It's in a way insurance for Samuel, but it's also paying the guy who you believe can be your wide receiver number one, especially with Trey Lance at quarterback.
Yeah, and I mean, even though Deebo's been in the league for 4 years, he's still a little bit of an older wide receiver, I guess, compared to most rookies that came out. Because I think he's turning 27 this season. So
26 or 27, yeah.
Yeah, so I think 2-3 years from now he's hitting that 30 mark, and then Brandon Ayuk would still be kind of young. So it's kind of like an ideal situation for the 49ers that they're in a position where they have kind of like an abundance of riches. So it's a good, I guess, issue to have to select between multiple receivers versus not having any Pro Bowl caliber wide receivers.
Yeah, definitely. And before I continue, I wanted to say shout out to No Borders Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as he said, Deebo that like button. You smash that like button, subscribe, not only to my channel, but to Suneil's channel over there. But yeah, I mean, we talked about Deebo Samuel. That leads into really this mini camp talk, right? And we can go position by position. What were you most impressed about? We can obviously start with the quarterback in minicamp and just really in the offseason in general. What were you most impressed about?
As far as the quarterback, I mean, on the field, I think that mini camps are set up for the quarterback to excel. So I think that Trey Lance did what he was expected to do. It's set up for him to look good, and he looked good during it, right? His completion rate was high. He was able to show some improvement in his throwing motion, as well as some of the mechanic things that people are always criticizing him on. It seems like he's worked really hard, and you could see some meaningful changes in those as well. But to me, Rohan, the biggest thing that impressed me about Trey Lance was a few things. One is his ability to handle himself in front of the media. I think he does those press conferences. He answered all the questions the way you'd want your leader to answer them. You'd want your, franchise quarterback to answer them. He was confident, respectful, but still, kind of putting people in their place. And it seems like his mind is in the right place. The other thing that really I was really excited about was the relationship that he's building with Steve Young. Steve Young is my favorite 49er of all time. And I always look at Steve Young as somebody who truly has his finger on the pulse of the 49ers. Like, other than, even more than Montana and Jerry Rice, I think because of, Steve Young being in the media as far as with the NFL and, calling or being in part of, NFL commentary, but also just he's still staying around football and I think cares about the 49ers a lot. He always seems to know what the team is thinking as far as like personnel. And I also believe just his experience in the NFL is going to bode well for Trey Lance. I think he's a great mentor for Trey Lance. I love that he reached out. Steve Young reached out to Trey, and Trey and him are creating that relationship because I don't see anything but positives coming out of that relationship. So those are probably the main things that really impressed me about Trey this offseason.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. For me, it's his composure and his maturity as a 22-year-old starting quarterback in the NFL. He's so young, and it's great to see how he carries himself in this setting. And to me, Trey Lance has been really everything that the 49ers kind of wanted right out of that quarterback, at least from what we've heard, in terms of the player that he is, in terms of the person that he is, more importantly. And so while I think the player that he is will be judged a lot more during training camp with pads on, where his processing and all those things that you don't necessarily, all the little things really will be judged a little more critically because it's in live action. As for now, I'm extremely excited just because of the person that we've seen, the person that the 49ers drafted, and how he's gone about his offseason, his work ethic. He's going to continue to work in Southern California after this minicamp period. He just continues to try and get better. And that's something that I really enjoy out of Lance. Now, at the quarterback position, obviously there's not much, but what is your biggest concern heading into training camp?
Yeah, I mean, just depth. right? I think one of the biggest Achilles heel for the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan is depth in that quarterback room. The years that obviously their starting quarterback was healthy, they were able to go pretty far and deep into the playoffs. The years that it wasn't, they weren't, right? And the reality is the NFL is a league that injuries happen, and expecting your quarterback to be able to go out there and play healthy for 17 games in the regular season may be a tall order. And obviously, if your quarterback goes down to a season-ending injury, not too many teams have expectations to achieve their full potential. But in the case of a Trey Lance maybe getting nicked up and missing a game or two here and there, is a guy like Sudfeld going to be able to come in and hold the fort down? Is a guy like Purdy going to be able to come in and hold the fort down? I don't know. I mean, Purdy and Nick Mullins, and Nate Sudfeld remind me of Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard. And we all know how that quarterback room held tight when, Jimmy went down. So I think that's basically it, but that's kind of nitpicking, I guess, Rohan, because at the end of the day, like I said, there's not too many teams that if their starting quarterback goes down, they're going to be that competitive. So, I guess if I am selecting what the weakness of the quarterback room is, it'd just be depth.
Yeah, it can be depth. For me, my biggest concern definitely would be if Jimmy Garoppolo was on the roster and taking practice reps. More importantly, taking practice reps away from the other guys. That would be my biggest concern of the quarterback room because it signifies that the 49ers mishandled the situation again, right? They've been pretty adamant that Jimmy Garoppolo will not be a part of the roster. But if it gets to that point, not only is it potentially creating a controversy between Garoppolo and Lance, you're also shouldering the idea of carrying a $27 million backup. Whenever it gets to your backup quarterback, your season isn't necessarily like your season is essentially over, right? You shouldn't spend $27 million for that regard. Not only will it cause a controversy, it takes away key reps from the other two people, like you said, where we'll only really get to see a true, like how Nate Sudfeld, how Brock Purdy, how one of them can really face under actual NFL pressure and things like that in training camp. And if Garoppolo is taking those reps, well, guess what? You're paying $2 million and never giving Nate Sudfeld the opportunity. You drafted Brock Purdy and you're not giving him a single rep, right? Because Sudfeld would be the third quarterback on the roster. So to me, that would be the biggest concern. And I hope it doesn't get to that situation because not only for Trey Lance's sake, but for the 49ers' sake, that they can finally move on, cut ties, however that may be. But yeah, that would be my biggest concern for the quarterback room. Now let's transition in a way to the running back room. What were you most impressed about?
I don't know if there's anything that really impressed me, Rohan. I mean, there's not much that you can really take, I guess, from
right.
what we're
Right,
seeing.
that's the hard part because there weren't running drills at all. So
yeah, no pads.
Right.
Like, there's not really too much that you can tell. I mean, I guess we could go. I mean, was there anything that impressed you about this running back room?
Yeah, I was going to say like the size. Not necessarily something we saw on the field, obviously, because those pads and size doesn't always translate to strength and play style. But the 49ers are building a room that is like a lot more bigger than in previous years, right? You don't have the agile backs in a way, like a Raheem Mostert, like a Matt Breida, who are a different archetype. Instead, you have a 225 or 222, 225 pound Tyree Davis Price. You got a 220-pound Elijah Mitchell. You've got a 220-pound Jordan Mason. You've got these big backs that complement the smaller backs on the roster, like a Hasty. Even Jeff Wilson isn't that like small himself. Right?
Yeah, he's around 210, 220 as well.
Exactly. So like you have a pretty big room, and that is that tells me the direction of Anthony Lynn kind of going forward.
Yeah, and where you use that as that's something you're impressed by, that would probably be the thing that I would say if we're saying worried about, that would kind of be it, because we do kind of see the same clone of each back as far as size and and speed, and that hasn't necessarily been the way the 49ers have shown success in their running game, right? So why that kind of worries me, Rohan, is because to me that means that the explosion from the running game is probably going to be coming from the wide back position, whether that be Deebo or whether that be Ray. And I don't know if that is necessarily a bad thing. To me, I would just rather have my wide receivers take if they're going to take extra contact, I would rather it come from playing the wide receiver position than lining up in the backfield and getting hit with linebackers coming downfield to be able to hit them. I just in 2019 was the best year Kyle Shanahan had as far as his rushing attack with the 49ers, and there was a big contrast between a Tevin Coleman and a Breida and a Mostert, and that combination I think was what caused a lot of success in the running game, because Tevin Coleman would soften them up, and then Mostert and Breida would come in for the home run. They don't have that home run from a running back, it seems like, at least. I don't know. Maybe they will. Who knows? But as far as from the running back room itself, I don't know if we have anybody that's going to be able to go off for those 40, 50, 60-yard touchdowns that we've seen from the running back room before. So to me, that's a little bit of a question mark. Just seems like they're going to depend on Deebo, maybe a Ray McLeod or Danny Gray even, to create some of that explosion from the backfield. I don't know if that's necessarily a winning strategy, because the 49ers haven't, shown that ability to win, because it seems like Kyle Shanahan strays away from that, in the playoffs or in, crunch time.
Yeah. And to me, I'm kind of banking on that person being a healthy Elijah Mitchell. Last year, he was really battling a knee injury the entirety of the season. If he's healthy now, I'm waiting to see how does that speed translate. I'm not saying it's going to be 4.38 speed. I don't think the tape showed that, but I want to see how does that speed translate when he's fully healthy and when he really doesn't have to worry about any more knee issues like he did all of last season, which really limited his practice time. And so I'm kind of depending on him to be somewhat of that home run guy for the 49ers. But again, we'll see. We don't really know until the Pats really come on.
And Rohan, Ryan put up a comment that to me kind of shows why it could be an issue. Because if he's saying, it will be more power and sweeps, maybe inside zone, but I think our outside zone days are over. To me, that's kind of scary, because the strength of at least the players that we're most confident with are the outside guys, right? Trent Williams and McGlinchey. It's not the inside guys, right? We're going to have a brand new starting center. The two guards, maybe it's Brunskill, and then a brand new, left guard in Aaron Banks. So if the inside is where we're hoping that the strength would be, well, 60% of that inside are brand new players that we haven't really seen at all. So that's where I'm saying, like, okay, well, the backs that we have do point to what Ryan's saying, that it's going to be more inside running, but the biggest question marks on our offensive line are in the inside. So that's where I think it's a little bit of a scary situation.
And if that's the case, I mean, yeah, that could be that's a very good cause for concern. So because obviously, like you said, not only are these guys new, they haven't worked with each other before for a majority of the part as well. So we'll see how the 49ers try and adapt. Because Anthony Lynn, obviously a run game guru, and the 49ers have their old schemes as well. We'll see what combination of both do they use to potentially free up space in the backfield. But let's move to the wide receiver spot. What were you kind of impressed by, and what are you concerned about at wide receiver?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned this, or we've discussed this before. I think the biggest thing about the wide receivers that I am impressed by is the depth finally there, right? Before, we've always had maybe 3 good receivers on the roster, guys that you could depend on. But then the 3 after that were not anybody you were really excited about. That's not necessarily the case right now. I think with Danny Gray, even though he has an injury right now, Ray McLeod, and whomever ends up rounding off that 6th spot, I think are much more talented than the depth that we've had in past seasons, like a Richie James Jr. or a River Craycraft or Mo Sanu. So that's where I'm most excited about as far as this running back room. wide receiver room. And then just the speed, right? You got 2 or 3 guys that are known to be burners. We haven't really had that in the past, right? So having that speed there, I think, partners with having a quarterback that has a stronger arm. So hopefully we'll be able to see, the ball go down the field a little bit more with these guys like Danny Gray, like Ray, who can, outrun pretty much anybody on the opposing team.
Yeah. You talk about the depth, and I'll go a little more specifically on a person, specifically actually on those two. Really, it's Gray and then McLeod. Both of those guys showed out in their limited time at training camp. It was first Gray, right, where people were talking about his speed. The defensive backs were actually noticing how the rookie flew on the field. And then McLeod, he was the guy with a ton of volume. People necessarily didn't expect McLeod to participate as much in offense, right? People thought he was a special teams addition, but he's proving that he could potentially be a check down guy, be a offensive guy that maybe his issues with holding onto the football are over, right? His fumble issues, his drop issues, maybe those are over. Maybe he can be a little more reliable on offense. And if that's the case, he's a great check down guy because of his ability to work after the catch. And I think that works with 49er offense.
Well, we'll see, right? Because he hasn't really been hit. So we don't know if the fumble issues are there, but definitely showing potential that he could be another Yak boy or Yak bro that will fit in with, Ayuk, Kittle, and Deebo. So it seems like the 49ers love having a receiver like that can, get yards after the catch. I'm not ready to necessarily say Ray his fumbling issues are over because we haven't seen him in full pads being hit, but hopefully those issues are behind him. Obviously it's something that, he had fumbled 6 times last season. So I'm sure that's something he's been focusing on this offseason, whether it be how he holds the ball or, decision-making and choices that he's making while running the ball. So that's obviously something I think the 49ers need to make sure he's good with moving forward.
Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily meaning fumbles, but more the concentration drops. But you're right. That's a good point in that you have to wait for pads to come on, for contact to happen, for McLeod's fumble issues to arise or not. And again, all of this is obviously with the tail of caution because wide receivers like Deebo Samuel were not practicing. Even in that last practice, there wasn't a single of the top 4 wide receivers that were practicing for the 49ers. And so this is all obviously knowing that these guys are going to play limited roles, but at least having confidence that they can complete those roles to do whatever they're asked. That's a good sign. As for a concern with that wide receiver group, to me, it's maybe the lack of connection, not connection, but maybe the lack of cohesion with Deebo Samuel and Trey Lance at the moment, right? Obviously, it's such a star player that you don't necessarily need to worry, but it's limited practice time right now. Samuel didn't practice this entire offseason with Lance, while Lance was working with them pretty much all the other guys, right? He worked with McLeod at times, he worked with Jennings, worked with Ayuk, he worked with a couple of the other guys. And so that's one thing I want to see. Can that really just jump off immediately during training camp?
I agree with you. I mean, there's not really much to nitpick, I guess, with this wide receiver room because, as far as the top 3, we know what they're capable of, and they, for the most part, are able to play throughout the whole season. So you're not necessarily needing so much depth, but the depth has increased, so that's a plus. Now it's just about obviously a brand new quarterback, building that relationship, building that timing on the field. Luckily, there's still a lot of offseason to be had. I think there's more that kind of stuff is built more through training camp, going full speed with pads than right now when, everything is kind of geared towards just more the mental and kind of getting into shape versus actually intricacies of the playbook and execution.
Yeah, definitely. And so now moving from the wide receivers, let's go to offensive line. You spoke about some of the concerns, right? Regarding the run game towards the interior, we don't know how that'll fare. So tell me something that you're impressed about by the offensive line just in this offseason part.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the guys that we are going to be depending on coming into shape. So Aaron Banks looks like he dropped a lot of body fat, he looks like he's still the same size, but definitely more physically fit. I think that shows a lot of work ethic. He decided to spend the offseason in San Francisco working with the strength and conditioning team, and I think that shows a lot. And some of that has shown in the limited time we've got to see Aaron Banks play. He wasn't getting pushed around as much as he was during last year's camp, and he just knows that this is his job. Now he's moving into his more natural position, and he seems to be playing better there as well. Also, it seems all indications are that Brendel is going to be the starting center. Just looking at his athleticism, obviously you haven't got to see him play too much, but the fact that he has that, you talked about cohesion between Deebo and Trey. Well, Brendel and Trey have a lot of experience working together. He's probably the most. He's obviously the center that Trey Lance has worked with the most in the NFL. So that's a thing. And I guess another thing is the depth, right? A guy like Burford seems to be stepping up, even though he might not necessarily see the field as a starter. It's nice to know that these depth pieces that aren't necessarily going to be starters, like a McKivitz, a School, a Burford, are playing with their role right now with the potential starters either resting or nursing injuries, that they're coming out getting the reps and holding their own against some guys that are really good on the defensive line. So I think the depth and seeing the guys that are going to be stepping into that starting role come prepared, I think are both good signs.
Yeah, definitely. And to me, you touched on it at the beginning. It's Jake Brendel. I wasn't necessarily high on him, but I was optimistic, and I did predict that he'd be the starting center after breaking out the connection between him and Lance, him and the offensive line coach, and all of that. So just to hear all the remarks about Brendel, right, and to hear whatever you've heard on paper be put in true to real life, meaning the athleticism's there, despite him being 28, 29 years old. He still is as athletic as he was at coming out of college when he posted a 994 RAS score. The smarts is there. He calls all the protections, and you have a guy in Trey Lance who did that at North Dakota State, meaning that if Brendel's able to do that and Lance cedes the responsibility to him, that shows the value of Jake Brendel's mind. And this is also coming from a backup quarterback or a backup center who hasn't started ever, right? And being able to call the protections. I think that's one other value of being in a Kyle Shanahan offense for multiple years. You can gauge the playbook to the point where you can call the protections. And so his mind and his athleticism, like pointed out or stuck out to me. Obviously, we don't know how that is going to translate into his play. Athletes don't always become the best football players. So that's something we have to see in training camp. Can he really sustain what people are saying about him, and can he hold on to the center job? That we don't know at the moment, but I think he is the favorite, and I thought that was something that came out of this camp.
Yeah, but also, he's also a big question mark. He has been cut in his career 5 times and 1 time by the 49ers. So, so he hasn't had a lot of meaningful playing time in the league. He's always been a backup, whether it be, for not only with the 49ers, but for other teams that he's played for. But, the offensive line coach is high on him. Kyle Shanahan has said great things about him. And for me, the biggest stamp of approval that I actually believe is Trent Williams. I think Trent Williams is the best player on this team. So what I'm saying is he's the best player at his position than any other 49er. And that's saying a lot because Nick Bosa's there, Deebo's there, and Fred Warner's there, Kittle's there. There's a lot of guys that could be the best player at their position. But to me, it's head and shoulders Trent Williams. When he divvies out praise, it's always tempered. It's not just because it's a teammate. He always uses some kind of like factual basis as far as why he's saying what he's saying. And he doesn't over promote on people. He's positive, but he's not going to be over promoting unless it's truly something that he believes in. Him saying that he's comfortable with Jake, he's the brains of the opportunity of the offensive line, and he's very smart and is going to take well with the opportunity given to him. I think to me that eases any stress that I may have had, because obviously a guy like him knows what he's talking about, being, the best left tackle in the game right now.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And it's also nice, just a sense of reassurance when a guy like Trent Williams, like what he talks about, he immediately points out Jake Brendel, right? Like that's something that's valuable to see. Obviously, words are words. You really don't know what happens until actions are made. So that's what we wait for training camp for. Shifting over to the defensive side, there's a ton from our defensive line, given that that was our best unit. And real quick before actually we shift, talking about Jake Brendel, he's going to face the biggest task of his life, not in an NFL game, but really against his own defensive line in practice. This is the best defensive line. So, really, this is the best test for the 49ers to see whether Jake Brendel is ready or not to be a starter for at least this year as the bridge to potential rookie. But moving to the defensive line, what were you kind of impressed about? Was there any storyline that you saw that really piqued your interest from the defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, we are all expecting this defensive line to be very good. They have so many good players along the line. I'm really just looking for who's going to step up as that outside outside edge on the opposite side of Nick Bosa. Obviously, Bosa's there, Armstead's there. We know what we're getting out of those two players. They've shown it on, consistently over, multiple seasons. Kinlaw, is obviously slated to be, the other inside guy next to Armstead. Hopefully he comes, in and is able to perform and stay healthy. But that, outside edge, it doesn't seem like it's going to be Drake right away. He obviously showed room for improvement, I would say, to be nice about it, as far as, what he actually showed on the field. Clearly the coaching staff and the other players are very high on his potential, which is great. But is it going to be Ebicom? Is it going to be Torre, who a lot of people are speaking high on? Is it going to be a guy like Amenahu or my guy, Jordan Willis? Is he going to play on the outside or move on in the inside, something like that? There's a lot of options there, man, and it's going to be kind of interesting to see what it is. Couldn't tell much because clearly, we're not going full speeds, pads, all that kind of stuff. You can't really hit anybody in these camps, but yeah, I think they're in a good situation, and seeing who rises to the top is going to be fun to see.
Yeah, I'll talk about the rookie Drake Jackson, like you said, because a lot of guys, Nick Bosa, the coaching staff, and even Samson Ebukam all talked about him. Samson Ebukam talked about how Drake Jackson's a guy that's going to push him for a spot. And to me, I actually really like that because the 49ers are embracing the competition, right? We know that from the top up, they love competition, but it's also cool that in the locker room, the team is embracing competition. And so, yeah, I'm interested to see the battle between Ebukam and Drake Jackson. How does that fare? And just really, how is Jackson going to work with Nick Bosa? How is he going to work with the rest of the defensive line as training camp comes?
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the battles, like, overall, I know we're going position by position, but the defense is so stacked at so many different levels with talent. Who makes the roster is going to be really, really interesting. Like on the offensive side, I think you kind of know who's going to make the roster, who isn't, with maybe the only question mark being, who's the sixth wide receiver that makes it. But as far as defensive line, there's a lot of good talent that just might not make it because there's so much depth there. Cornerback, another position, like some people that we're fans of might not make the roster because of all the depth there. So that's going to be interesting to see who comes out of camp as making the 53-man roster, because there's some bubble guys right now on that defensive line that could go really help out another team's defensive line and just won't be able to make it for the 49ers.
Exactly. So obviously the 49ers have to be careful with who they keep, who they try and put on the practice squad. But like we said, ton of bodies. There's going to be a ton of competition, which means a ton of fun on that defensive line. Moving to the linebacker group, really this was an interesting group. There were a couple of injuries from the top half. So while Shire, who had knee and shoulder surgery this past offseason, was not practicing. Neither was Fred Warner, who was just taking it as a precaution from a lower body injury. What did you kind of see from the linebacker group, if anything?
Yeah, once again, another position that you can't really tell too much from just because of what we're actually being able to see them do. Clearly, the starters didn't play too much, so we got to see a little bit from, who are going to be the backups. I just, this is another position that I think is just a position of strength for the 49ers. They coach up very well. They develop linebackers that have, a certain skill set, and the 49ers are really good at isolating who has those abilities and bringing them on. Guy like Dre Greenlaw is a fifth round draft pick, and could be a starter on any roster in the NFL. A guy like Azeez Al-Shaair is an undrafted free agent, and they're able to, they put a second round tender on him. To go from undrafted to a team believing you're worth a second round draft pick, that's a lot. That's a big upgrade, and it all stems from this coaching staff being able to isolate what they need as far as a linebacker to play in this system, and then giving them the coaching and the tools to be able to succeed in that. I think they have a lot of guys behind Fred, Dre, and Azeez that can fit those roles, whether it be an Oren Burks, who I think, can really show out in the next few years and be a replacement for a Dre or Azeez if they go, they outprice themselves, with another team. And even a Flanagan Foles and some of the rookies that I know you're talking about and high on, these guys can all come in and be a replacement type player. Maybe not necessarily this season, but definitely in the next couple of years. So I think the stable there is good for the future as well.
Yeah, I know Grant talked about two players in particular. One you mentioned, Norman Burks, and the other was Curtis Robinson, both of who had good days at certain times this offseason. Now, I think this group is going to be very interesting because we know who's set, right? We know that they're the top three guys in Al-Shaair, Greenlaw, and Warner. We also know that the 49ers paid Oren Burks money to be a key special teamer and also a developmental linebacker. So I think he's got a roster spot. Now, who does that fifth one go to? The 49ers have been high on Demetrius Flannigan-Fowles for a while. They like his special teams prowess, and I think they're valuing special teams. So it could be him, or it could be one of these rookies. And given how the 49ers develop these guys, I'm wondering, do they carry these five? Do they try and bring in a rookie just so they don't lose them to another team? Or do they try, again, to try and sneak some people on the practice squad like they tried last year with Justin Hilliard and risk losing them as they try and get people on the practice squad? That's the question that I'm looking to see get answered. And who do they prefer over others?
Yeah, and I think injuries are going to play a key role. Who could stay healthy, right? So that could be the difference between you making the roster and not making the roster with those bubble type positions, like you said, fifth linebacker. Because I think you're right. Warner, Greenlaw, Azeez, and Oren Burks to me are locks to make the team at that linebacker position. So yeah. Flanagan Foles probably has the foot in the door out of the three because of obviously familiarity with the system, can play special teams, and the team obviously likes him enough to continuously bring him back. But if he ends up not staying healthy through training camp, that could be a reason to, go with one of these rookies. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the linebacker group, obviously, because the starters weren't there for or practicing at least, not much news from there. A battle I'm interested to see is who gets more playing time. Will it be Al-Shaair or will it be Greenlaw? I want to see which one the 49ers hold in higher regard, at least early, right? Because Al-Shaair was the breakout last year. I think he'll still continue to be the number 2 linebacker, but Greenlaw is the healthy one right now. Greenlaw is the one who's having the majority of the practice reps since Warner and Al-Shaair aren't out there. So does that matter for the 49ers? Do they continue to roll out Al-Shaair like they did last year? But moving on to the secondary, our final group for today, what was just the storyline that impressed you from the entirety of the secondary?
I mean, just the depth, right? Seeing guy like our number one cornerback is Charvarius Ward. they're obviously being smart with him. Maybe he's, a little nicked up, so they're just trying to keep him healthy till training camp. And we still were able to have Emmanuel Mosley and Ambry Thomas, who are our two starting corners, come playoff time, that were, played really, really well in the second half of the season. So to know that we have a guy like Charvarius Ward still there that wasn't even playing, and we still have two really good corners that I would be happy with if they were our starting two corners, there is great. And then we also have a guy like Jason Verrett, who's on the roster too, that if he's healthy can easily move up to, the starting cornerback role as well. With, we know his ceiling and what he's able to achieve when he's fully healthy. So it's just really great to see that. I mean, I think the ascension of Hufanga, jumping in to be that safety alongside Jimmy Ward, I think is a good sign to see. I mean, we have a lot of depth in the cornerback room. Safety room, I don't know. I mean, the depth behind there left a little bit more to, I guess, be needed, whether it be a Moore or, a guy like Leon O'Neal, or I keep forgetting the guy they brought in from Indy. What was his name?
Are you saying undrafted?
No. They brought in from Indy
Odom.
Odom, yeah. Odom, I don't know how well they kind of showed out, but obviously that who's going to be that starter, it looks like it might be Hufanga, but the depth there I think is going to be really important at the safety position, because if a Hufanga or a Ward do get injured, who's going to step in, and is that going to drop the level of play at that safety position? So yeah, I mean, like I said, it's mini camp. Cornerback, I'm very excited about. I think that's the strongest cornerback room the 49ers have ever had under Shanahan and Lynch. Safeties, we'll see. Maybe a guy like Tart can make it on there, and then I'd be a lot more comfortable with the safety room.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you're right. There is some depth at the safety position now. Is it quality depth? That's something that is yet to be known. But I agree. I think I'm very impressed by the ascension of Hufanga. I like what the staff is saying from him, and obviously the thing that he has going for him, right, is the instinct, the mind behind the football. And I think one thing that is helping him this year, and that could have helped him last year if the 49ers were able to implement it, was cover one man. 49ers now got Charvarius Ward so they can play 10 more man defense, 10 more press. That also helps out a second-year corner now in Ambry Thomas, who was drafted for that specific scheme. And so I think the overall part is going to let Jimmy Ward play as the overhang defender, while letting Hufanga work his magic in the box, which is where he really excels. And I mean, the 49ers have that depth, like you said, to where they can rotate, cycle, and have a guy maybe like a Dante Johnson or maybe a backup cornerback over there in that overhang position, while letting Jimmy Ward work in the box or in the slot. And so, yeah, the versatility is there with certain players. The depth is there where you can rotate and cycle. But I am impressed by the ascension of Fanga and just what we've heard from certain players and certain reporters from what they've seen about Fanga.
Right. I think the biggest question mark out of the cornerbacks is who's going to end up winning that slot position. It looked like, obviously going in, it looked like it was Denard's job to lose, but I don't know how impressive he was. I haven't really heard too much about him wowing everybody, and it seemed like Samuel Womack played pretty well at that position as well. So is it going to be Denard? Is it going to be Womack? Or is there somebody else like, is a guy like Mosley or Verrett going to jump into that position so that they could get, more of these corners on the field at the same time? It's going to be interesting to see. I don't know how much you want a guy like Verrett or Mosley to play slot, just because, of the tackling, and, you don't want that extra, I guess, going in nose head first into, that kind of stuff. But there's so many corners, you got to get them on the field somehow. So maybe that is a thing where you bring in a guy like Verrett or Mosley and put them at the slot.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously the health of Verrett is very contingent on one of those players working. again, another question which will be solved by training camp time. The 49ers are hopeful that they can clear Verrett by that time so that he can start practicing and getting back into shape. But Suneil, before we end today's show, there was a report last week coming out from ESPN. I forget the name of the writer, but it suggested the 49ers should trade Jimmy Garoppolo for Baker Mayfield, a one-for-one swap that gets both teams away from the quarterback situation that they are currently in. Do you think either side says no? And if so, which side and why?
Yeah, I think this would be a trade that benefits the Browns and decimates the 49ers. Like, Baker is just not I don't know. I mean, I think that Baker gets a lot of criticism, a lot of it unfair as well, maybe from certain members of the media because they just don't like his personality and some of the off-field stuff that he did. And, just his swagger, I guess. I just don't see Baker being comfortable being a backup. And I think that he has the mentality that he should still be a starter on a team. And he doesn't seem like the humble student that I think would be coming in trying to revitalize his career. I think he would want to be competing for a starting job. And do I think that he'll beat out Trey? No. But is he going to be a great mentor and all those types of things for Trey? I don't necessarily think so. I would much rather have Sam Darnold, like a straight swap with Sam Darnold, because I think Sam Darnold, obviously his and Baker Mayfield's contract would be exactly the same because they're fifth round options. Maybe, I don't know if Darnold's might be a little bit less because he wasn't drafted as high, but still, I would much rather do a swap and bring in, Sam Darnold, who I think would be ready to kind of, learn from a guy like Shanahan, learn from this system, would be okay with being the backup and kind of holding the clipboard and just kind of rebuilding his confidence. He'd be back in California where, he obviously played college at USC. So to me, I would say no. I think the 49ers would say no. I just think Baker Mayfield is too much of a star to bring in as a backup, right? He has his own commercials. He has all these types of things. I don't know if that's really the guy you want to be a backup, especially when you have a young quarterback in Trey Lance. Another thing that he has to worry about.
Yeah, I agree. I'd be extremely disappointed if Baker Mayfield was what do you call it? Baker Mayfield and Jimmy Garoppolo switch teams, especially for the 49ers. If the 49ers made that move, that would be a very, very serious issue. And I don't think that will happen because the main asset of Jimmy Garoppolo's contract is that it's non-guaranteed. You're going to give that asset away if you trade for Baker Mayfield, who has a fully guaranteed $18.8 million contract. That's why the Garoppolo contract for their respective teams right now, that's why the Garoppolo contract is a better contract. Just because the 49ers have so much flexibility, they can restructure it. They can release him without having any cap ramifications. They can keep him if they really choose to. But they have so many options, whereas the Browns, they can't cut Baker Mayfield because you're losing $18.8 million if you do so, right? It's as if you're paying him to play somewhere else the entirety of his contract. Now, as for the Sam Darnold idea, no. I'm not a huge fan of that either, unless we get serious, significant draft capital back, because really you're putting yourself in a financial hole again, and that's something the 49ers haven't really been, haven't shown that they want to do in the past, right? That's not something that is really a part of their MO, unless it is to gain serious draft capital. But I do think that Jimmy Garoppolo, if he gets traded, great, but I don't think the 49ers should try and I don't think the 49ers should try and get either of those two options should a trade occur.
Yeah. I mean, that's not obviously first choice. I'm just saying if you're going to bring back somebody with a guaranteed contract, I would rather have the personality of a Sam Darnold versus the personality of a Baker Mayfield. Yeah, I mean, if they have the ability to snipe some guys off of the roster from Cleveland, there's a lot of guys that I wouldn't mind taking from that roster. But it would be interesting if he ends up with Cleveland because Jacoby Brissett's over there as well. And those two guys were, backing up the GOAT, Tom Brady, in
Yeah.
New England. So it would be interesting for them to go full circle and be back on the same team, battling for, the backup or even, I guess, the starting job with whatever happens with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, definitely. But Suneil, thank you so much. It's been a great show. All of you guys in the chat, No Border Spoke, CJ Gray, and everybody else that tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in on this fine Sunday afternoon. As always, be sure to subscribe to his channel. Be sure to hit this like button. Subscribe to my channel as well. What else do you got going on this upcoming week, man?
Yeah, I mean, I should be on, I think, with Wayne Breezy sometime tomorrow. I'm also going to be on, obviously, Tuesday with Jack Hammer, and also on Jesse's channel, Last Second Sports. And then I think we're going back on Wednesday if everything handles with your schedule and whatnot. So yeah, I'll be on. I think I'll be jumping on and probably streaming a lot more this week because I'll have a little bit more free time. So stay tuned. Make sure to like, hit the notifications and all that kind of stuff so you don't miss a thing.
Yes, sir. Thank you guys, and we'll see you guys next time.